It is such an honor for me to be able to welcome each of you to this, what I believe is a historic moment, and the second annual Electric Infrastructure Security Summit.
The very existence of the first world rests on reliable, uninterrupted electricity.
What we just saw here was the storm that comes from the sun. You want to think of that as a hurricane in space.
On March 13th and 14th, 1989, the Earth's magnetic field experienced a large impulse along the U.S.-Canadian border, and it started a chain of events that only 92 seconds later resulted in a collapse of the Quebec power system.
I think what we have to understand is that we've had about a half-century long failure to understand the risk of space weather, and especially how this risk has inadvertently migrated into the electric grid infrastructures.
A 1 in 100 year event, the last one occurred in 1921, would interrupt service to 130 million customers for approximately 4 to 10 years. And again, I'll just tell you, my professional perspective is that's optimistic.
The significant space weather storm is not a matter of if, but of when.
We've known about the threat of electromagnetic pulse to our critical infrastructure for many, many years, since the Cold War.
Nothing is untouched. If you have a nuclear explosion of the right kind 60 miles over Cleveland, Ohio, our prediction was that the eastern power grid from Canada to Florida would go down.
A rogue nation would not have to have the most accurate delivery system in order to do the damage that the EMP would have.
If we actually announced to the world we had a lethal flaw in our system, which we were not going to do anything about, which could be easily attacked by a bunch of amateurs, then we're inviting such a cheap shot from a bunch of amateurs.
This is a NEMP level source. We tested this in conjunction with the U.S. Army on a government range because it's obviously too dangerous to test in my garage where I built it. I built this for a trifling sum of money.
We understand that proliferation of nuclear materials and designs is a reality. Non-nuclear devices are even more readily available and growing really unchecked.
They'll take any form of physical event, whether it is an EMP or otherwise, and use cyber to exacerbate the situation. It should be understood that cybersecurity, though not a primary concern, should be factored in as one of the most important secondary concerns. The way we have embedded cyber into our day-to-day lives, it comes along for the ride no matter what.
It's the possibility of long-term interruptions, long-term destruction of the power grid that brings us together today.
The EMP has been known since 1945, common knowledge since the 1950s, and we had a severe geomagnetic storm hitting the northern hemisphere 150 years ago. So the new thing is not the EMP, the new thing is not the space weather, the new thing is the vulnerability of modern society.
The Department of Defense depends for 99% of our electric power on the private sector. We're utterly dependent on the flow of this electric power to be able to execute our core responsibilities to the nation.
Everyone believes the grid is very robust, but it really is not.
An EMP attack is one of a handful of threats that could be considered an existential threat to the United States.
When you lose electricity for a long-term power outage, the first thing that you're going to lose is municipal water systems.
There will be no supply of drinking water, no food, no gasoline, no transportation, no communication, no medical care.
Emergency services, government services, banking, finance.
The largest pipelines in the world that provide gasoline all the way to New York originate in Houston, Texas, and the first 2 pumping facilities are electric driven. Talk about interdependencies.
We would be facing a public safety, a public health environment, a requirement to provide support to our citizens that would be unprecedented.
We have 18 critical infrastructures in the United States: water, sewage, food, etc. All depend on electricity. If the grid goes down, we are not back in the 1970s pre-web, we're back in the 1870s pre-electricity, and we don't have enough plow horses or enough pump handles.
A major catastrophic EMP attack on the United States would cause an estimated 70 to 90% of the population of the United States to become unsustainable. It is almost, of course, impossible for any of us to wrap our minds around such a figure.
The Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science and Technology held a hearing on this topic. The witnesses told us, we, as a nation, have virtually no protection of our electric grid against electromagnetic threats.
The extraordinary thing is that almost nobody knows about it. You know about it. The Iranian leadership knows about it. But if you go to any man in any street, in virtually any country in the world, a blank look will come across their faces, and it will be somebody else's department.
The duties of the Commission were to assess the EMP threat to the United States. EMP is one of a small number of threats that could hold at risk the continued existence of U.S. civil society and can disrupt our military forces and our ability to project military power. Potential adversaries are quite aware of EMP as a strategic weapon, and we think that neither the military or civil structure is effectively dealing with the problem.
FERC initiated a study with our good friends from DOE and DHS to evaluate the effects of EMP on the power grid. This has been studied several times before.
There's been at least 8 inches of studies on this, just from the high-ranking commissions. There's always more you can study, but I think what we need to do is now figure out what's the no-regret strategy of the first thing we're going to do.
If we can just sit and comfortably talk about how bad the problem is, there will be no disagreement. But I think it is time to talk about what is the right path and how do we begin working on this problem.
There is usually a moment in the life of every problem when it is big enough to be seen and still small enough to be addressed or solved. And you and I live in just such a moment.
We know how to fix the problem. The Department of Defense spent 50 years developing technologies to protect against EMP. So the technology is not the problem.
The security of the grid is a real concern to the Department of Defense. I think we can be a significant part of the solution.
The industry is willing to do this. It's really a solvable problem.
If I had a bottom line up front for this presentation, you mentioned earlier today on cooperative protocol, and that's what it is.
There is a shared commitment amongst policymakers, amongst regulators, and amongst industry to understand this problem and do something about it.
Government and private sector together must address this problem promptly.
It will be very helpful if corporations have the confidence, hey, if I go forward, I will not have to start all over. There needs to be communication and a sense of commonality.
We have a long tradition in our country of creating problem-solving partnerships between government and the private sector. It is what we'd like to call shared responsibility.
Neither the public sector nor the private sector can do this on its own.
I hope this discussion will foster you who run the grid, who understand the grid, who know your equipment better than anyone, to think, what could I do to make sure that maybe the key asset, what's that one socket that I absolutely can't allow to go out?
Resilience, continuity of operations, it starts in the day-to-day business of our bases and goes all the way up to the greatest threat level.
As we replace our aging assets, why don't we replace them with capabilities that would withstand these events?
This isn't witchcraft. There's only a few kind of simple solution sets that we can look to help prepare for any of these threats. The first is equipment solutions. Secondly is human preparation. training, and third is supply chain preparation, getting more inventory.
Let's move this forward right now. We don't have to wait for the legislation and the regulation to start implementing solutions.
I thought those three points of Joe's were exactly right on. Tier and prioritize, define the right actions, and then develop the right kinds of cost recovery structures.
I'd like to suggest that when we get together in London in March, everybody come prepared to talk about what they've done.
For as little as $100 to $200 million, we could protect the 300 most important extremely high voltage transformers in the United States.
How much risk are we willing to maintain in order to avoid applying that financial support?
The Electric Infrastructure Summit process is a government/NGO framework for making progress on these problems. It is international.
There are many nations represented here today, and the United States and Europe are interconnected in many ways, and we are economically highly interdependent. And I think that therefore we need to set ambitious goals for cooperation.
This is a global problem. It affects global enterprises and organizations like IBM, and we are taking this very, very seriously.
What we've got to do is to bring to the attention of the world what is potentially the greatest catastrophe to have hit the world for centuries.
This is a threat, a risk, whether it's to our siblings, our nieces or nephews, that we want to make sure we can look them in the eye clearly.
And the first purpose of any government or its leaders is to protect the lives and security of its citizens. The failure of this responsibility renders all others meaningless.
Until this is a matter of common discussion in each of our countries, in the offices of those who deal with our electricity supplies, with our hospitals, with our water supply, with our financial transactions, with our transport systems, with our communication systems, we shall still have work to do.